Hey, Bae, and welcome back to another podcast. I'm Joe,
I'm Hannah.
I'm Angeli.
I'm Mel.
and we are the Bae Collective, and so are you. Today, we're going to be talking about purpose, and with us four, as well as two of our girls in the Bible, Ruth and Esther. Jet and Hans are going to go explain a little bit about their story, and then we'll just dive into how God's working in their lives and in ours.
So, Ruth was a Moabite woman who married into an Israelite family. Her mother in law, Naomi, was widowed and also lost her sons. So, when this happened, Naomi had asked her daughter in laws to leave her, but Ruth wanted to stay. And so they went back into Bethlehem where they knew there would be work for both of them, or for Ruth. So Ruth took on wanting to provide for Naomi and was to work in the fields despite any challenges or circumstances that they might have faced that were unfavorable or where she was placed in a vulnerable position. Boaz owned the fields where she would be working and protected her and was taking her away from those vulnerable and unfavorable circumstances so that she'd be able to work. He viewed her as admirable, and this was during a time where Moabite women were not viewed in a very good light. That is a little summary of Ruth.
Thanks, man.
If you don't know who Esther is, you should read about her. But before she was known as Queen Esther, she was an orphan. Both of her parents died, and she was taken care by her cousin Mordecai. And she is, quote, beautiful Jewish woman. But she lived in Persia, which the Jewish people and people from Persians were in conflict. But because she was so beautiful, she was picked by the king to be his wife to marry. And so she became queen. And basically, Mordecai informed her that, hey, Persia is hurting us Jewish people. So she went on and to convince the king not to hurt the Jewish. And now they're living. And she saved them. And that is who Queen Esther is.
Thanks, you guys. I think they're both pretty intense stories, and they're both really different, and in terms of their character and what came of it, they're both different, but what is the same is how God works. And I think that's just the beauty of having God and having the Lord in our life, that we have the same God as the God we read in the Bible, because he's very much alive, very much working, and very much in all of our lives. So I just kind of wanted us to take a moment to see those common threads in both of their purposes and then even in our lives, because one of the things that really hit me, or actually, let's do two of the things and then we'll touch on both. The first one would have to be obedience, and then the second one would, which we'll touch on in a little bit, is knowing that our purpose is meant for more than just us. So when we look at both of their stories, what you see is that obedience isn't always the easiest thing or the most logical thing. Sometimes the question that we may have in our purpose, whether it be I don't know, your major or your job, or even in our purpose for all those other things, even me with Bay Collective, and even for all of us, do we stay or do we keep going? And that is a really heavy question, because I feel naturally I don't consider myself a lazy person, but just the insides of my soul, I just want to do what feels safe and what feels best for me, is this gonna like I feel these days everyone's all about that self-love and self-care and being soft, which is great,
Like what works for me.
yeah, this is just me doing me, I just want to live a simple life. Good. If the Lord has called you to those things, great. But the thing really comes down to is like if I decide, should I stay in my role? Should I go and head out to something that feels a little better and that's like less stressful, whatever? Is this where the Lord wants you? Because it's not a matter of like, what do I want? What makes me feel good? But what is it? Where is it that the Lord wants you to be? And for me, that litmus test, like the easiest way, because I like to run away a lot. It's like literally in my name in the Bible story. Like I literally ran from Nineveh. But one of the things is like, okay, if Lord, you want me here, Lord, if you want me to go, wherever that is, it's going to cultivate the fruit of the Spirit. And that's found in Galatians. Oh man, I dropped my iPad. I got an iPad, you guys. Sponsor me, Apple. Galatians 5:22-23. And it says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self control. I want you guys to also note that it's not fruits of the Spirit, it's one fruit. So you can't say, like, oh, well, I love when I'm here, but it brings me self control here. Like, there's not going to be that dissonance. Like, it should be producing the fruit in its entirety. I think of it like a tangerine or a cutie or a citrus fruit of any sort.
You can't
Like,
just choose one.
yeah, like you can't just be like, oh, I want love here and then like slice it. No, like the fruit of the Spirit is one. So just a side note there. Um, yeah, so anytime that I do feel like I'm at crossroads or I'm really going like in the thick of it, and you're like, dude, Lord, I've been like pursuing what I thought you called me to do for like 4 or 5 years, and like we're just not getting anywhere with it. Like, do you still want me to stay? Do you want me to go? And like I meditate on that verse and I bring it up to God. And I'm like, here's what's like going through. It doesn't feel good and I don't see anything. But like the fruit of the Spirit is here. And like in Ruth, she says that like iconic verse, which turned into an iconic song. And it was like, where you go, I'll go, and where you stay, I'll stay. And she was talking to Naomi, but like that's really like it resounds as a prayer to God. And that's just like my biggest takeaway from like both of these women and like how it resides in my life. And I kind of just wanted to hear your guys' thoughts, or like if you've ever been in that position too. Like, how did the Lord take you through?
To go or to stay.
Yeah. Where you go,
To be or not to be.
that's the question.
Yeah, well, for me, one that I can think of was in high school. I went to a performing arts high school as a vocal major, and at this point in my life, I was confused and going through an identity crisis. So go ahead and check out our identity stuff, because in order for you to understand your purpose, you needed to know who you are. So I think that's why I was very confused. And I wanted to leave. I wanted to quit music in general. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. That I even wanted to leave school so I don't have to think about singing. But it was very complicated. There were a lot of things that we had to go through just for me to switch schools. And then it's my senior year. So I was like, why would I do this in my last year of high school? So the Lord allowed me to stay. And I mean, in the moment, like even after graduating stuff, I was like, why? Like, what was the point of me staying at this school? Like, why didn't you allow me to go to a different school? Because I feel like there wouldn't be big of a difference if I left, at least in my life. But after I graduated high school, that's when I answered the call to become a worship leader. And I think it was very necessary for me to go through that season in life because, one, I had to learn who I was outside of my talents and skills. And two, with my talents and skills that I was gifted with, the Lord allowed me to grow them in a performing arts high school. He used the school to give me the knowledge that I now have as wisdom, because without knowing all those things or growing in that way, I mean, the Lord will do what he's going to do. And he did at that school. And that was the purpose of me staying there. And so, yeah, I was confused. Like, should I leave? Should I stay? I chose to leave, but the Lord said, no, stay. I have a purpose. Just see. just wait and see. So if you're in that season of like, I don't know, Lord, like, what's the purpose? He'll tell you. You'll figure it out.
Maybe not right away,
Yeah.
but it will click. It's pretty. God does it like that. It's not bound by our timing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've been in a position where I was questioning whether or not to stay or go. I'm pretty sure I wrote a blog post about it, or also it's like part of my God moment as I was growing up, and as like I was maturing in my walk with God, is the question of whether or not to stay or go in terms of friendships. I don't think to begin with I was hanging out with the best of people, but it was very, I guess, self-satisfying to like be with them, and also the moments that we'd be together. But as I was maturing in my walk, you start to, grow in your discernment, and things start like not making sense anymore to you. It just doesn't align with your values and where God has is going to bring you. So in that moment and in those times of our friendship, God was using me in their lives. But there's a time where, like I can't compromise my own walk to try to, help other people. So it was really a matter of, where am I going to find like peace and joy again, like the fruit of the spirit, like in the decision that I am going to make with God on my mind and with God at the center of my life. Do I stay or go? And eventually the decision was to go, because I started not feeling well around them. Like, I didn't feel like I was myself. I didn't feel like I could fully be myself. So it was a weight lifted off. But also in that time, um, it was like a very like painful time. There's a time where like, also like losing friendships, like the feelings of like loneliness, but also knowing like I'm not alone because I have God. But it's just a matter of like, like the physical part of it, of like letting go, like the cliche but very true, like let go and let God. Like, yeah, that was a time.
For me, facing with whether I have to stay or if I have to go, this was in regards to my post grad life. Like, it is. And it's like, you know, if you like after you graduate, usually it's like, oh, you're gonna go straight into a job. But for me, I was like, oh, I'm gonna take my time, like it was like I was being selfish with my decisions. And I was like, oh, like I'm gonna take my time, I'm gonna enjoy having this time for myself. And I mean, yeah, it's nice to take time for yourself, but I was falling into a place of comfort and complacency, and like I wasn't considering God. And there came a time where I was like, I'm tired of living like this, like God, like where do you want me? What do you want to do with me? Like because it's not about me. It's not about what I want. um and like I took my time and like praying and asking God again, like where to place me. And like you will have all of these plans for yourself and all of these expectations and ideas, and it's great, but if you don't bring it up to God, it's like it's pointless. And I was like over here thinking like, oh, I think I'm gonna do this for my job, this for my job. But again, like letting that go and letting God like move you is when there is transformation. And like when I was like thinking about this, I was like, okay, like when do you know it's from God? In my experience, at least, it's like there's, well, yeah, fruit of the spirit, unexplainable peace, and like things just seemingly fall into place. Like again, with the whole like I'm gonna do this job or I'm gonna do that job, like, and then when I asked God, like he just put like after all of this praying and like communing with him, he literally placed my job into my lap. And I was like, yo, was it that easy? Like all I had to do was be like, hey God, can you help me, please? And so to answer the question, did I want to stay complacent or did I want to move forward in faith? The obvious answer is to move forward in faith. So yeah, that is me.
Praise God. And that's on favor.
Amen. Dude, God's crazy. Because I think, like, you know how we live in an upside down kingdom, like, as Christians? Because I feel like when you look at, I don't know if you guys ever like had those courses on Instagram where they're like, okay, to figure out like what you want to do and how you're gonna get there. Like, I feel like the world, maybe that wasn't a good example, but yeah, like the world is really after like, what is it that you're doing with your life? Like, what do you want to be when you grow up? What are you doing after college? What are you doing in college? What's your major? What? But, and like, how are you gonna do that? Like, how's it gonna make sense? What are your numbers? Like, if you're gonna open up a business, how are you gonna do this? Like, I need your business plan, blah, blah. But the upside down kingdom of it all is like God's not after like what and how. He's after like who and why. You know what I mean? Like, who is it that you're becoming? And like, why are you doing this? Is it because like you want to satisfy something for yourself? Or is it because you want to glorify me? And I think that like really resonated with me, Mal. Like when the Lord like moves you, like allow the Lord to move you because he really is just asking like, hey, if you give me you, I'll do as you need. And like, yeah, I don't know, I think that's just like a really beautiful thing because it takes off so much pressure and it does kind of bring an inexplainable peace that like when you allow God to do what he must because all you gave him was all of you, like when things happen and when he moves, the only thing that the people will see when they see your life is that it was God. And that's just like what he wants to do. Which kind of transitions into the second point of like your purpose really is not just for you. Like it's meant for so much more. It's meant for other people to see and like to expand the kingdom. Which I guess we can dive into as well. Like, I don't know, I feel like I've been talking a lot. But yeah. Like how do you guys see your purpose? Like what when you think about like building the kingdom and like even like in the context of like Ruth and Esther, like are there any points that really showed you like, man, I was being a little selfish with my calling, like this really convicted me in seeing that this is what it's all about?
For sure. No, and I like that you brought it up though, because like little tangent, I'm in the book of Acts right now in my quiet time, and there's a lot of stuff that like when Saul turned into Paul, because when Paul was living out his God-given purpose and spreading the gospel, not to the Jews but to the Gentiles, those who are not God's people, like pre-Jesus. When people would see or hear the stories or like the stuff that disciples do and people see, it would say like, oh, and then they glorified God. So I think that was like a good point that you brought up, because if you're living out your God-given purpose, God will be glorified, God will be seen, and God will be known. So I guess that's also like where you can see where your heart is when you are doing, because we could be doing the stuff that aligns to the purpose of God, but at the end of the day, who's being glorified, you or God?
Dude, that's deep. I think like we live in a generation that people do want to be known. Like influencer life, things like that, being famous. I don't know. I was like a Disney kid, so I'm like, I'm gonna be just like Hannah Montana. And there is a piece of me, like if I'm being honest, like you want to, like I want to be significant. I want to have an impact, and like I like the ability to influence. And that's not to say that's wrong, but it really is a question. Like you do have to check your heart and see, like, is this for me? Or is this because, like, the only thing I want is for God to be seen? And you really have to check your heart, because the enemy can switch it up real quick for you if, like, you're not guarding your heart. So I think that was really good.
Yeah, I feel that a lot, like how you're talking about, like, oh, we do want to be significant, and like, you know, we do want the acknowledgement, but you know, like at the end of the day, the only acknowledgement that like we should really like appreciate or like want to have is from God. Because me, like being a worship leader, a lot of, I think my hesitation came from me being worried about like technicalities and all this stuff and like getting stuff wrong, when in reality, like, you know, it's not about me. And yeah, like, you know, I want to do everything in excellence, but at the same time, when God is at the center and God is at the root of it all, and you know, you pray, like, and I pray that, you know, the Holy Spirit just helps guide me, and I pray that, you know, the worship that is being, you know, like that he will be worshipped the way that he wants to be worshipped. That kind of shifts my mindset away from, you know, like all the technicalities and all of the, oh my gosh, like if my voice cracks, like that's so embarrassing. I mean, it is like after, like when you watch it and we're like, oh, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so embarrassing to watch. Yeah, and like you mix it up, or like you don't like key up, or like you don't hit the note, you know, like people, like, you know, like as a worship leader, like you're helping usher people like to, you know, like to God, and for them to present, you know, whatever they need to offer like onto the altar to God. So, you know, I'm there to help them, but it's not my doing, you know. I So that's like a lot of my hesitation with becoming a worship leader, was I had to like get out of my head and be like, it's not about me. Like, it's not like a matter of like, oh, who cares if I like mess up, but it's like, but who like matters like at the end of it, you know. So yeah, that was definitely something that I struggled with a lot going into leadership, because I also never really viewed myself as being into leadership. I'm kind of just like, you know, like I'll be there to help, or like I'll be like, okay, like, so like what needs to be done, like I'll do it. um I guess like going back to like the stories that we were talking about, um in terms of like, you know, like your character, your obedience, and like things not being completely like about you, or like it's never really about you anyways. um like you were saying, like people will see God like through what you've done, you know, like if you are doing it in the way that God has intended to, and with God in mind. So in Colossians 1:10, this is the amplified version. It's so that you will walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, displaying admirable character, moral courage, and personal integrity, to fully please Him in all things, bearing fruit in every good work, and steadily growing in the knowledge of God, with deeper faith, clear insight, and a fervent love for His precepts. So all these things just follow as you are obedient to God. And again, like going into how the story of Ruth is, Boaz viewed Ruth as being admirable, or a woman of noble character, because of what she was doing for those around her, or things that were not directly for her benefit. You know, she was there and she was doing the work to help Naomi and to help their family. So that's just kind of like a mismatch of everything that we've been talking about.
Well, I guess to touch on Ruth too, because like she's a widow, so her husband died, and she has spoiler. Sorry. It's like we don't even know who he is.
He has no name.
But so, you know, she's like going through it. She's like grieving, and what you said, like grieving your friendships, so, like to bring it back about that. And that is why it is so important to like to heal, you know, because then if she decided to leave Naomi and to stay where she was because she can't move on from like the death of her husband and this grieving season, then she would never have met Boaz and started the lineage of Jesus. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Because that's how it like got into
Got
that.
yeah.
Boaz, Obed, Jesse, David. And then,
David.
like a little bit, Mary.
It's like 16 more generations. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can read it in like the intros of the
In
Gospels.
Ruth, it says, in Ruth,
Oh, really?
Like,
Oh.
the very end of the.
Wow.
Yeah.
They're
But it
like
just says up to David. It doesn't say,
spoilers.
like, Jesus,
Oh.
but, you know, like from David.
Yeah.
That's what.
Genealogy.
Genealogy is very
It's not the most
important.
exciting to read it.
I usually
Yeah.
skip over it if I'm being completely honest.
But there is purpose to that
There's
too.
purpose to the genealogy.
Sorry, there's something you said. Oh, it was about like how you keep living, like you have to live a life that like the only thing that is seen is like how God works. Because one of the interesting I think it's a fun fact, is that in Esther, the name of God is not mentioned. I don't think anywhere in the Bible. Fact check me on that, but I'm pretty sure. Like, yeah, like in the whole story. However, we know that the Lord is moving and we know that the Lord is working. And I think that's one of the things that we need to see in how we live our lives and purpose. Like the decisions that she made when it came to how she handled coming to the king and like how she handled her people, they're all evidence of the Lord moving. Like that's just without a doubt. And when it comes to, you know, spreading the gospel, sharing our testimonies, sometimes it's not as explicit as we think. Sometimes it's just something so profound and atypical that the question that resides with people is like, what is it about that made it feel so different, but I feel like so loved, so like drawn to you, so like moved, and like that really does give an opportunity to point to God, to glorify God, that when like someone's making you real mad at work or someone like things are just not going your way with the person and you're like, dude, that's annoying, but like you still choose love and you still choose to do things like with a standard of excellence and respect, and like you're unmoved and your peace is just like that is how the Lord works, because it's real easy to live a life as like a closeted Christian and just be like, okay, like I know how faith works, especially on a Sunday. I know exactly how to worship and I know how to pray behind closed doors. But the moment I go out, like you're acting like everyone else. And that's just like sayang. Or that's a waste. To like the real reason that the Lord has placed you where he has. Like there's so much purpose that you see in Esther, even from the moment that she was positioned, that she was apart from her people, yet somehow the Lord brought her back to still influence them, both within the king. Is it a kingdom? The castle? The house of the king and outside. And that's just like, well, the Lord is not bound, but, and like the Lord isn't limited in how he can move, just so long as what you choose to do is in obedience. So, yeah, I think it's crazy. And I think it's just wild how God doesn't even like have to have his name mentioned, but he's just like still so prevalent and prominent.
Thank you so much to everyone who either joined us here on YouTube, or listened to us on Spotify, our podcast. Be sure to share us with your friends and also share the gospel with your friends. This has been Mal,
Angeline,
Hannah,
And Joe.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
On.
Oh, sorry.
Bye.